So those are the three reasons. I have to, however, say the three lessons come out of it, which I think is strategic for our conversation, which raises tension in some of us. The first is I don't believe young people are always progressive. I think it's a myth. I think this idea that young people always lead progressive struggles around the world is not historically true. Young people led the Chinese Cultural Revolution. It destroyed Chinese society. Walk in Germany and go see who's leading the AfD, or the Le Pen movement in France, or the Five Star movement in Italy, and go see some of the people who were part of the Nigel Farage, this thing, or even some of the Trump movement. These are right-wing fascist movements led by young people as much as by older people. And for me, so this idea, I think that young people are always progressive, is romanticized. Young people have the potential to lead progressive struggle, absolutely. Like they did in Fees Must Fall, like they did in 76, like they did in many other cases. But they have as increased the possibility of leading reactionary struggles, and I think that that's one thing. The second is, don't they talk about young people as a completely homogeneous group. I think that in Fees Must Fall, you were able to align many forces, and I think at the basic level, the vast majority of young people believed in the core principle of Fees Must Fall, which is lowering the cost of higher education and enabling access, that everybody should be, without the cost of problem, should have the right. I think that was across the board. But the imaginaries of the future, young people are a plural group. There are multiple imaginaries, some of which come into tension with each other and disagree with each other in fundamental ways. And that's the thing that I think is quite striking, and that young people need, and at least we need to capture in this thing. And then the final thing, which I think is important, Fees Must Fall and Fees Must Fall activists were, I think, brilliant at describing pain, society's pain. And I think they did a powerful job of bringing this and putting it onto the national agenda. They have not been as successful in imagining how you transcend pain. Because that is about confronting power. It's about confronting, transforming power. It's about the strategies and tactics of how you outcome. And there, I think they've been less successful. I think the suggestions made are sometimes not as innovative, not as strategic, not as understanding of the failures and successes of past strategies. And so capturing and describing pain, I think, is a powerful imaginary that has been put on the national agenda, would never have happened without Fees Must Fall. Transcending it is, I think, a debate that still needs to happen, and it can only happen if we are honest about the successes and failures of the last couple of years.
Great and interesting opening thoughts from our panelists. I think I want to get a follow-up and a response, Wandile, to some of the points which Adam has raised about the lessons, particularly for students, for young people, and whether they're homogenous or not, that young people have not always been progressive. And I also want to follow up on the location of these protests. The mere fact, which both Adam and Loveland have mentioned, that they happened at historically white universities, and the issues that it raises about class, and the fact that it was able to then go on and dominate headlines was because it took place at these particular locations. And the question I would like to explore is what that tells us about South Africa. What do we care about? Whose voices matter in that particular instance? So I want to firstly, I'll get your response to Adam's opening statements.
So, Prof, I've said before, you must be careful of comparing people you don't disagree with to dictators, because when Ego did something similar, you nearly expelled him from this. I mean, we are not a homogeneous group. Of course, we have many different, I guess, struggles within ourselves as young people. The very fact that the movement itself, I guess, blew up at Wits does not mean everyone at Wits is middle class. It means that there were many voices there, but they found one common, I guess, a common idea in which to communicate. And I mean, it is. So Roads Must Fall begins. Roads Must Fall does not continue as long as it was supposed to, because it was talking about ideology and theory, decolonization. It's difficult to kind of have that type of movement become a national one in which Fees Must Fall was, because Fees Must Fall, we're talking about money. We are talking about izinto. Ngiyabonakala ekhaya ukuthi kuyadliwa or ngiya esikoleni angiyi, what am I eating, what am I wearing? You can see that. And it affects the middle class. This is why I guess it blew up at Wits, because the middle class parents, or I guess families, kind of realize, you know what, now we can't afford fees because of, I guess, the economic problems that from 2008 until 2015. So when the middle class speak in South Africa, I guess we listen. We listen. It's not a good thing. The voices that need to be listened to, of course, are the poor voices, but the middle class kind of has a monopoly on being a dominant voice in the country. I mean, the location itself. Oh no! So the Fees Must Fall, the movement. It was. I think we must. It wasn't new, of course. So it was struggles that had begun many years before. I've traced, actually, I think I've to even 1994. I mean, these issues were happening at 1994. Issues of access, transformation. Back then, it wasn't colonization; it was transformation. So it was there, and it comes over the years. And I mean, in 1994, it actually made headlines also. So it's always been the dominant, historically white universities that then, I guess, become in the media. And then my question then becomes, if, I guess, Professor Habib agrees with the movement and sees the movement as something that needed to happen, when he comes into a university like Wits as a new vice chancellor, Black, I guess, knowing very well his struggles as fighting for transformation in his former years as an academic and in other universities. Why does it take so long, and why is it so difficult for him to kind of make the changes that need to be made? I mean, so he came in, and if he says he agrees and he knows that and I think he did know that this was going to happen, but why was there no pressure from vice chancellors to governments? I mean, they remove themselves totally from the story. They don't see themselves as people who are at fault. So those are some of the questions I have. Is that these are Black university vice chancellors. They occupy this position. They themselves, as junior academics, used to fight for transformation. And then when they have this power, and students, I guess, are questioning them, they see it as an attack on them and not on the system. Because they inherit the system and they don't change the system, and it takes too long. And then they say we must go to government as students, when I think it should actually be them who would have put the pressure and who had access to ministers of higher education better than us over years, and they didn't do that. So yeah, those are my reflections on that.
All right, we'll get Adam a chance to respond to that. But one of the points which was made earlier, Adam suggested that one of the things in which students were so brilliant at is describing the pain. And I think one of the reasons that the movement and its struggle did in fact resonate to the extent that it did is because it threw up so many issues which South Africans were confounded with, and primarily around institutionalized racism and the protracted and structural inequality in South Africa. And young people were able to articulate that in such sharp and fresh ways that it captivated the imagination of many South Africans. I'm going to quote a line here, Loveland, for you to respond to and think about, which is in the book, We Are No Longer These. It's a line from Sarah's essay, and she's talking about this, and she says, as women, we are constantly on the opposite side of either a penis or a gun, oftentimes both. And reflecting on some of the misogyny and patriarchy which played out within the movement during those protests. What was your experience during that time?
Okay. There's a lot. I want to answer your question, but I also want to respond to some of the earlier comments. So, I mean, I think just to address the question of gender and sexuality within the movement. So, I think this was one of those opportunities to observe how young people are not a homogeneous group, and where in many ways, your politics was constantly being challenged. So even if we were mobilizing around the question of fees, part of what happened in a lot of plenary spaces, if I can call them that, was a lot of us calling for us to actually practice the kind of politics we want to see in this world that we're trying to create, right? And so there was a lot of tension around, how men were behaving within the space, how cisgendered heterosexual people behaving within the space. There was a lot of questions that were raised about that. And I mean, I think in many ways there are parallels to draw from what happened during the liberation struggle, right, in this country. That it was, no, we need to fight apartheid and we need to deal with racism, and then after 94 we'll talk about gender, but right now let's just focus on this one thing. And so I think that in some circles there was an attempt to create this false dichotomy between the question of fees, higher education, access and affordability, and trying to separate that from other issues and other experiences that are connected to that on campus, but maybe play out on the stage that, of gender or sexuality. So one of the things that I think happened on quite a few campuses, I mean, I can only speak from my experience in Stellenbosch and some of my own engagements with fellow students at UWC, CPUT and UCT, because we didn't have that many Black people in the Western Cape, so we all had to sort of mobilize across our different campuses and physically go and support on other campuses. But I think that one of the things that was very evident was that the women students were oftentimes the ones doing a lot of the groundwork, doing a lot of the on-the-ground organizing, mobilizing, doing a lot of the actual shutting down of buildings, occupying buildings or blocking roads, things like that. So a lot of us were the ones on the ground doing the organizing, and then when the cameras appeared, suddenly the male comrades were available for comment with the media. So that happened in a lot of cases, and I think that I'm being a bit frivolous about it, but it's not to say that the competition was about who got to be in front of the media. It's more a question about how the narrative around that then becomes, oh, this is the face of Fees Must Fall, right? Or these are the faces of Fees Must Fall. And those faces then, and those voices were typically voices that, that were male. And so I think that what you may have noticed over the time of Fees Must Fall was that, there was a saying that kept going around: this movement will be intersectional or it will be bullshit. Sorry for my French, but we're speaking history here. So that was one of the things that kept going around. This movement is going to be intersectional, it's not going to be at all. And what that meant was that I think for a lot of us, we were saying that, and even me, I'm not interested in a liberated future if that means that, only Black men are liberated. And I don't say that to pit us against each other. I'm just saying that there is a particular experience of exclusion. There's a particular experience of violence and a particular experience of who is violatable that comes with actively being involved and actively laying your body down within the movement. And so there were quite a few circumstances, I think, where a lot of women students and queer students as well actually chose to sabotage the movement. And not sabotage it as in we don't want the movement to succeed, but that if you're not going to take our concerns seriously, then we're going to tap out. And so there were a few cases where the women students had organized and were like, okay, well, unless we address this, we can't continue in this conversation, or we can't continue in this mobilization. And I think sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So I don't want to misrepresent it and act like there was one perfect strategy for addressing that. And then I think we also saw the use of naked protest during the Fees Must Fall protest, but I guess there was it sort of attached itself with the End Rape Culture protests at Stellenbosch, the RU reference list protests at the university currently known as Rhodes, where female students were protesting naked, both to protest the way in which male colleagues were treating them in protest spaces, but also to protest issues of sexual harassment and rape on campus, issues of police brutality, and all of that was part of a bigger and a broader conversation. And so, there were certain spaces and conversations where people opted to step back because they felt that their experience was being ignored. If I may, just very quickly, Sisnikiwe, I just want to address some of the questions that Prof raised. So I think I don't really think it's a real tension, this question of homogeneity. I think we're all aware of that, and I think we owned that in many ways during the protests. But I do want to challenge this notion that students are brilliant at describing pain, but they weren't so good at transcending it, or providing alternatives or communicating solutions, etc., etc. I really want to challenge that idea, and I think it goes back to this question of what gets us to listen as South Africans. Who are we listening to? Why are we listening to those voices? Where are those voices? And. And so the one thing that I do want to say is that this is a narrative, and this is a narrative that I've been hearing a lot. And no offense, Prof, but I hear it from people from your generation, and it irks me. It irks me because I feel like, I'm hearing this narrative that makes it look like, it was a protest where we were performing pain, and then it was empty, like there was nothing going on between our heads about what we were actually asking for and what we were looking for. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, the generation that helped get us to 1994 had not really experienced such a severe challenge from the people that they were delivering 1994 to or for. Narratives about liberation, and who gets to own narratives about what meaning making is, what solution making is, what it looks like, what it sounds like. But even if that's not true, so let's say that's not what is going on, and let's say that really there is a lack of solutions from students. Firstly, there were multiple papers, like multiple academic papers, multiple conferences, multiple opinion pieces, multiple submissions made to Parliament, multiple submissions given to the department. Like, on so many levels, there was so much material that was created by students, sometimes in partnership with academics at our institutions who were supporting the movement, where we presented alternative models for funding higher education, where we did case studies from different countries, thought about different ways of funding education, thought about, asking questions about why corporate tax is at 28%, and it's okay for corporates to, send billions and billions offshore every year, and yet you're asking universities to carry such a heavy financial burden, and you're asking ordinary citizens to carry such heavy financial burdens in the form of VAT, in the form of personal income tax, etc., etc. There are actual economic models that students did work of creating and submitted those far and wide. There's a pamphlet that I can't remember the name of, and I'm wondering if there's any students here who can remember it, but there was a pamphlet that was even being circulated in our communities, at least in Cape Town, where we had presented various models, various conversations about decolonization, what the future can look like, etc. There was also submissions made by students about this question of Pan-Africanism within our institutions. Because as we know, other African students who come to study at our institutions mostly have to pay their fees up front, or they pay like way more than the average student pays. And so students also made submissions. I remember at Stellenbosch we made a submission proposing alternative funding models for other students from Africa as part of this question of Pan-Africanist solidarity and interrogating why South African institutions are imbibing these notions of colonial borders. There were submissions that were made around how we can teach in our classrooms, ways of reimagining the curriculum, not just of theoretically what the curriculum look like, but students made submissions at their various departments, at their various institutions around what we'd like to be taught, how we'd like to be taught, different platforms, different ways, different sites where learning can take place. But I think the challenge is that when these submissions were being made, the media was not there, because the media was drawn to moments when we were blocking the roads, right? So that they were drawn to a spectacle so that they could perpetuate this narrative of ungrateful Black children who are so privileged to be at university, and now they're protesting and making a noise and blocking the roads and creating traffic, and they're being violent, etc., etc., etc. So the media was drawn to moments when there was a spectacle, when there was something to report on. But when we make submissions, when we write articles, when we submit academic papers, when we're doing presentations, there's no cameras there, right? And so there's also something to be said about how the entire machinery of power and the entire machinery of managing narratives was actually very strategic and intentional about the kind of narrative that's going to be put out. I mean, we're university students. So if we're university students engaging in protest, best believe that there is something theoretical, there's something academic and intellectual about what we're doing. Right. So I really want to dispel this narrative, and I think we've got to engage that. So, last thing. So even if we think about who the students are, the former students are now, who are actively involved in academia, who themselves are teaching, who themselves are writing, who themselves are doing PhDs differently and doing their research differently. It's disingenuous to say that students were so good at articulating pain, but they weren't so good at providing solutions. The issue is that the media was very good at covering the spectacles of pain, but they were not interested in actually showing students who were rational, who were in sit-ins, who were in lectures, educating each other, educating the lecturers, lecturers educating us. They weren't interested in those platforms, and I think we've got to own that.
Absolutely. We're going to give Adam